Hello and welcome to the Moms Who Know podcast. I'm your host, Chanel Nielsen, and today I want to talk to you about failure. Not failure in the general sense, but failure specifically, my failure, and some things that I have failed at lately. And I just want to share these experiences with you because I have learned from them, and I hope that you'll learn from them too. And I hope by being transparent and telling you kind of how things are going, that you will know that when you have failures, it's okay. I remember reading a while back that Sara Blakely, who started Spanx, the company, when she was young, they would sit around the dinner table and her dad would ask her, "How did you fail today?" And failure was really celebrated. So I guess I'm going to use this opportunity today to celebrate my failure. Not something we often want to do. When we fail, it doesn't feel really great and we don't think, yes, I failed. This is so awesome. So to back up, let me tell you a little bit about what I've failed on and share this experience. So if you've listened to the podcast for a while, you probably know that I offer a few courses. Those are static courses that you can go in and purchase anytime. I have a course on setting up a morning routine. I have a course on health and wellness called Mind Body Transformation. And those are there and available. And I have a few people, who go in and buy those and use those. And I hope those are really helpful for people. Now, last year, I worked with a coach, a business coach, and we learned some things. And one of the things that we learned is creating a sense of urgency. And the coach that I worked with was big into group programs. And so because of those two things, creating a sense of urgency, and then because of the way she runs her business, I thought, okay, maybe the next step for me is to create some group programs. And I put a deadline to them, and that will make people just want to join these programs right away, and I'll coach them in a group. And so my very first group program that you probably heard me talk about was in November. And I hoped to have a huge group, but I had 4 people join this group. But that was okay. It was good. It was, my first group, and the women who were in it were great. And I got to work with them, and they worked hard and saw some changes in their lives. And so that was pretty cool. And then I started working to put together my next group. My next group was for health and wellness, and it was a 3-month group, and that started January 1st of this year. And I wanted to fill this group like, this is going to be awesome. We're going to change people's lives, and I'm going to work with these people. And the deadline was getting closer and closer. And I had 1 person signed up. And then right before the end, another person signed up. So I had 2 people in this group. And to be honest, that felt a little bit like a failure. But I said, okay, you know what? I have 2 people in this group. I'm going to make it awesome for them. I am going to just pour in value. I'm going to make sure that they have such a good experience that they'll tell their friends, and then I'll do this group again, and it'll be even more awesome. And, I'll really learn from this, and it'll be good for them and good for me. And this is going to be great. So, then I was getting ready to do my next group, which was a back to the morning routine group program. So that was where I was a couple weeks ago, and I had a conversation with my coach. We had gotten on the phone, and she was now working with a different coach, by the way, and she asked me, is your heart really in these programs? Is this something that you just feel so passionate about, that you want to do these group programs, that this is really what you are dying to do? And I said, there's a part of me, like, I know that the things that I'm teaching, morning routine and health and wellness, they can help people a lot. But there's a but. And the but is, I don't know if, this group program format and this method is my true love and my true passion. And she said, I'm going to offer you some coaching right now. And that is, don't do it. It was scheduled to start in a few days. And she said, just don't do it. Cancel it. No one had signed up yet. So that wasn't too hard to cancel, right? So After the conversation with her, there were 5 days until this group was supposed to start. And I talked to my husband, James, about it. And he said, well, you've already, promoted it on the podcast. I also already had emails that had gone out. I had been promoting it a little on Facebook. So I just decided, okay, I'm not going to do anything else on social media. And probably no one will sign up, but we'll just see. And so one person signed up for that, and working that out with her. Anyway, in that same week, after I talked to my coach, I had in my mind and body transformation program, I had the 2 people that were in it basically didn't want to do it anymore for different reasons. In fact, completely opposite reasons that they said they didn't want to do it. And I just thought, it's so interesting, it's not that I wasn't providing value, but I think that they could sense that maybe my heart wasn't totally in it, even though I was doing all this to try to, serve them and make it a good experience for them. I think that what you are feeling and where your heart is really shines through. And so I have these people dropping out. I have one person in my morning group coaching, and man, that was a failure, right? I'm trying to do all this and to create these programs, and yet they are not going anywhere. And I could have really let that get me down, but I was so grateful that the timing went that way, that I talked to my coach first and then everything kind of crumbled apart, because I realized, you know what? Group programs, group coaching like that online, that isn't exactly what I want to do. And that's not exactly where my heart is. And it allowed me to start to get really clear on my purpose and my vision and what I really want to do. I really feel that I was led to start this podcast. I feel like this is where I need to be at this time in my life, is, talking to you guys, having this podcast, having these amazing conversations. This is definitely what I need to be doing. Group programs, I never felt that same sense of, yes, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. But as I've pondered it and as I've thought about it, what I do feel like that about, I feel like I am supposed to be hosting retreats and doing speaking engagements. And I had talked to my coach about this, and having this conversation, it brought tears to my eyes, because I said, how can I do that? I have these kids at home. I'm not one to travel by myself. I don't leave my family. I want to be with my family. And she said, if God is giving you this desire, it comes with a promise that He's going to help you figure out a way to do this. And your family is not going to be left behind in the dust. And that is a powerful thing to think about. We have these things we want to do, and sometimes it feels so impossible to align what we want and our family's needs. And yet, if we include God, the divine, the universe, however you think of that, I think of that as God. As I include Him in my plans, then it's all going to work out. And so I have no idea how that's going to work out, but I'm going to just share with you my vision for the future, because I hope that you can catch this vision, and I hope someday this is a reality and you will join me. I really want to have retreats for moms. I want to have self-care retreats, and these retreats will be things like, you'll come and you'll have this pampering, kind of a spa retreat, that kind of self-care, but also the self-care where you're growing and you have personal development and you are going home with just so much change and inspiration on how to be a better mom and how to run things better in your family and how to make time for yourself regularly and how to do all these things, how to implement them in your life and to really make these changes in your life. I want to host these retreats because I want to see you face to face. I want to know you. I want to know your struggles and to get feedback from you and to have conversations so that we can talk. And that is what I want to do. I also want to host marriage retreats with my husband and I. When we were young marrieds, we went to BYU, Idaho, and they had a position there. It was a paid position. It didn't pay very much, but it also came with free food. So even just for the food, it was worth it. But we would do these weekend retreats, and we were called the host couple. And we would go with different faculty members to this lodge out. It was about an hour away from Rexburg, Idaho. I don't know exactly where it was, but we would stay there for the weekend, and we would plan all the food, and we would plan the logistics. And then we'd have these amazing people come and teach us tips and tools and tricks for marriage. And it was so awesome. I mean, we just got such a strong foundation for our marriage by being with these people and by learning these tools. And we look back, James and I, and we'll talk about that, and we'll say, oh my goodness, we're so blessed and so lucky to have these experiences, because it strengthened us, and we've always had these tools in place, and we recognize not everybody has that experience and not everybody has those tools. And so a lot of times you're just doing what you've seen modeled. You're doing what your parents did, and your husband's doing what his parents did, and you're trying to make those mesh. And yet, if you had this toolkit given to you together and you learned how to use those tools together, what a difference that would make in your marriage. And so I want to provide that for couples, and you don't even have to be a young couple. James and I think about, young couples, that's what we were, but you can be a ways into your marriage and still need and use these tools. And so James and I want to do that. We want to have these retreats. And I hope you can hear and feel how excited I am. And when I talk about that, my heart is in that. That is what I want to do. So group programs are just not where my heart is, but this retreats, being with you, seeing you, having conversations, that gets me excited. That is what I want to do. And that is what I'm passionate about. So this was a good learning experience for me. And it was also a big failure. And so I want to talk a little bit about learning, about how we learn, and about that next step, because we're all going to fail. This one was a kind of a bigger failure in some ways. I mean, we have small failures all the time. Dinner gets burnt. We lose our temper with our kids, those kind of things. But I put a lot of energy and effort and money into these group programs, and they failed. And I think that it's easy when we fail to just spiral in our thoughts like, I failed, therefore I am a failure. I'm the worst. This is so lame. I'll never do anything right. Just going down that whole path of thinking about our failures. But if we can stop and pause and think about, okay, I failed at this, but look at how much clearer I am now on what I want to do than I was a few weeks ago before all this happened. I thought I knew what I wanted to do. I was trying, I was attempting, and this failure actually got me clearer. It got me closer to knowing what I'm going to pursue and what my purpose is. And that is amazing. So thank you, failure. I'm glad. I'm glad I could fail a little bit, because that helps me to learn. I think that as we go through life and as we're processing and learning different things, we have so much information coming at us, through things we read or podcasts we listen to or things we see on social media. All the time, information is coming in. And yet a lot of times this information doesn't do a lot to change us. So you might, listen or read or in some way accumulate information and yet not have it do anything for you. The same thing could be said of failure. You fail but it might not help you to grow. And so I want to talk about this next step, and that is digesting the information that you get, processing the information. And that can happen in a lot of different ways. I'm going to give a few different examples of what that looks like. So one example is recently I went to a conference. It was a long meeting with D. Todd Christofferson, who is a leader in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it was amazing. I got to sit in the front row. There were probably, 100, 150 people in this meeting. And we got to meet with him and some other leaders in our church. And he spoke. They all spoke for probably, I think we were there for about 3 hours just learning. And I was taking notes and writing all these things down and learning so much. And they dismissed us a little bit early. So my family wasn't quite expecting me home yet. And instead of hurrying home, I decided to stay a little longer. And I went outside to just this beautiful place. And I sat down and I had my notebook and I wrote down 3 questions. What do I need to know about my business? What do I need to know about my family? And what do I need to know about primary, which is I am the leader of the young children in our church congregation. And so what do I need to know for primary? And I wrote down these questions and then I just waited and I listened. And then I wrote down all the things that came to me. And some of them were things, I looked over my notes, some of them were things that we had heard, but most of them were not things that we had heard in this meeting. They were the next step because I had heard great information and powerful thoughts. And yet those powerful thoughts really didn't do much for me personally until I took that next step. What do I need to know? What do I need to do? And that digesting process of figuring out what it meant for me then allowed me to apply it and to implement it. And I think that a lot of times that we get so much information and we're like, oh, that was awesome. I'm inspired. That was so good. And then nothing. We don't take that next step to figure out what does that mean for me and how am I going to put that into practice? So another example is every morning I read scriptures and I used to just read the scriptures and I would, read them and, oh, that's, an interesting story. That's an inspirational message. That's awesome. But I found that when I just read, it's not for one thing, I don't retain the information as well. And for another thing, I'm not taking that next step. What does this mean to me? And so now every time I read, I have a notebook and I am writing down, what am I hearing? What am I learning? Why does this matter to me? And what do I need to do about it? And the insights are huge. Now, I have used 2 spiritual examples. If you're not, a church person and those don't resonate with you, I want you to know this same thing can happen with any kind of learning. When I'm reading a business book and I want to learn more about business, the same thing applies. If I'm reading a book and I just am like, oh yeah, cool, interesting information. Oh, this guy is really good. It doesn't really change my life unless I take the next step and apply it. And for me personally, that means having a pen, having a highlighter. I've got to do something to mark it, to write it down, to take that next step on paper and to say, okay, I just learned this principle. I am going to apply it by doing this. It keeps me accountable because I can look down and see what I wrote later and say, oh, okay, I learned that and I said I was going to do this and I need to do it. And it also helps me to break it down. I had an interesting conversation with, I was in a meeting and this was actually after the meeting that I referenced earlier with D. Todd Christofferson. The next day, we were in a council meeting And most of us had been there and we were talking about it. And I felt like I should share this principle that, it helped me to go sit down and say, what did this mean to me? And one of the men in that meeting said, "Oh, I'm glad you said that because, sometimes when I hear all this information, I feel guilty because I hear it and I'm like, yeah, that's really good. I should do that, but I'm not doing all of it. And I just feel guilty and I feel overwhelmed." And one of the things that taking the time to digest, to write it down, to assimilate this information, one of the things that it does is it takes away the overwhelm, because instead of feeling like bombarded with all this good information, you are bringing it through your filter and your lens and saying, what do I need to do next? What do I need to do right now? Because we can only do one thing or two things, we have this limited capacity, but when we're taking action, that's where the power is. If we get all the information, but we do nothing with it, then that is only potential power. That's potential growth. It just sits there and it doesn't do anything. We have to make it into action and into growth by taking that next step. We have to go from learning to implementation. So it sometimes is hard, right? It's not always easy to go from learning to implementation. And so we need to find what works for us. And I'll give you a couple of other examples. So definitely what works for me and what I would recommend starting with is writing it down to help you go from learning to implementation. Now, this can be used in so many ways, reading and meetings, like I mentioned, but also podcasts. When you listen to this podcast or any podcast, are you just a consumer of information? Are you just listening and, oh, that was nice, and move on with your day? Maybe. And maybe that's all you need from a podcast, and maybe that's okay. But I would challenge you, if you hear something that's powerful to you and you think, man, that's really good, I would challenge you to take the next step. And I'm going to invite you to practice this by joining me on social media. And that can be one of the great uses for social media. Yes, you can also get a notebook and a pen, and that's a great way to do it too, and write it down. But another way to do it specifically with podcasts is to go to the podcast social media page, in this case, shameless plug, Moms Who Know Podcast. You can find me on Facebook or Instagram. At the podcast group on Facebook or on my Instagram page, and go there. And I ask regularly, what did you learn from the podcast? What was your takeaway? When you share that, not only is it enlightening other people who get to see it and who get to go, oh, I didn't think of it that way. It sticks with you. It solidifies in your mind the things that you learned. Most of the time, the things that we learn have a little bit to do with what people said and a lot to do with what was going on in us and the way that we process that information. So I'm going to challenge you to do that. Maybe this isn't your episode that you're feeling like, oh, I learned a ton from. I hope that you are learning. But if it's not this one, go back to another episode. Go to someone else's podcast. Either way, just go ahead and try that and see what it means to you to take that next step. So that's your challenge for this is, what did this mean to you? What did any podcast that you're taking the time, you're giving your time to listen to that podcast? Why? What's it doing for you? What's the next step? What's it going to mean for you tomorrow because you listened to this podcast today? One powerful coaching question that I've heard asked when the coaches that I've worked with teach a principle, when they're done, they say, what are you hearing for you? And in my group programs, my little group programs that I tried, I use this, and it's so powerful to hear when people say what they're hearing for them. It's usually not exactly what I said or what my coach said. It is totally through this person's filter, and it's what they need to know. So my question for you is, what are you hearing for you today? What have you learned today about failure, about learning? Let me know on social media. I hope this has been helpful for you. I hope that you can really work to implement the things that you are learning throughout the day. Have a great day. And thank you, as always, for listening to the Moms Who Know podcast.